theory is behaviorism, and behaviorism is another grand theory that dominated the field of psychology around the early 20th century. However, this particular theory was in opposition of the psychoanalytic theory at the time, which, as you remember, proposed that our actions are driven by our unconscious mind. However, behaviorism stood behind the idea that every action and thought and feeling that we have is learned. And therefore, this theory is actually called the learning theory. And we learn through the process of conditioning. And that is associating a response to a particular stimuli. And the more we receive that stimulation, we tend to respond in the same way, and therefore we become conditioned to respond in a particular way. The top theorists under this theory is Ivan Pavlov, who was a scientist and who actually did his work on animal digestion, winning him a Nobel Prize. And throughout his research on animals, he stumbled upon this concept of human learning through the process of classical conditioning. So what happened is that Pavlov would assess the amount of saliva that his dogs would produce, and when he would present them with food, he would measure the amount of saliva that the animals would produce. One day he started to notice that the animals were starting to salivate at the mere footsteps of him coming into the lab without even being presented with the food. That caught his attention, and he devised multiple experiments to see if he could train those dogs to salivate by associating what is called a natural stimulus, which is food, with a neutral stimulus, such as the sound of a bell. So every time he would bring in the food, the dog is supposed to salivate, and then he would bring in the food and pair it with a bell. Of course, when he bring in the food, the dog salivates. When he rings the bell, the dog is not supposed to salivate because ringing a bell doesn't mean anything. So that is what is called the neutral stimulus. Then he started to pair the two together. So every time the food was presented, the bell was rung. And day after day, this is the training process, this is the conditioning process. He presented the bell by itself, and therefore the result was obvious. The dogs started to salivate because they associated the bell with the food. So he turned his observation of the dog's salivation to his footsteps into an actual experiment where he paired the food, which is a natural stimulus, with something that is considered unnatural or neutral and should not be soliciting the same reaction as the natural stimulus. This brings me to my point of how everything that we do in our daily lives, at one point we were conditioned to react a certain way because of our past experiences. I recall when my daughter was around 2 years old, I started to notice how excited she would get whenever I put on my shoes. And what I've realized is that she had associated putting on shoes with going bye-bye, and therefore the excitement of me putting on the shoes brought in, the association or the conditioning of going outside. So the next theorist is John Watson, and John Watson brought behaviorism into the United States. So he was a student of Pavlov, who actually believed in the same concept of that theory, and that is we can train or teach people to do just about anything, according to John Watson. As a matter of fact, this is one of his quotes: "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well formed, and my own specific world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select." So he really did believe in the power of conditioning and training, and the power of teaching and learning. He went on to devise his own experiments, some of which are considered a little bit unethical in our days. He is known for the Little Albert experiment, where he took a about 9 to 11 months old infant who had the natural stimulus of being fearful of loud noises, and the natural love of furry things. Think of a stuffed animal or a house pet. And he started to pair the two together in order to condition Albert to fear animals and furry objects. So every time the infant would hear the loud bang, it's natural that they get startled and cry. However, when they are presented with a stuffed animal or a furry object, they're not supposed to be fearful or scared. However, when he paired the two together, the child started to become conditioned to fear that furry animal or furry object, and therefore developed a phobia of furry things. Of course, it's considered unethical because he went on to harm that child's development into fearing such things, and he never went back and unconditioned him to reverse that phobia that he developed. The third behaviorist is B.F. Skinner, and Skinner did not disagree with either of the previous theorists. As a matter of fact, he believed in conditioning, but he went on to develop a different concept of conditioning. Instead of classical conditioning, he said that we are also conditioned by the reaction that happens after we do something. So the learning process by which a particular action is followed by either something that we like, desirable, or something that we don't like, punishment, is the concept of operant conditioning. So think back to the way you were raised. If you did something good, you might have gotten a reward, a sticker or a lollipop, or you earned an outing or allowance, whatever it is. And when you did not do something that was allowed, or you made a mistake, you might have been subjected to punishment, or withheld, your parent withheld some of your belongings. So this reward and punishment is another way we condition humans, according to Skinner, into doing or acting the way we do. The last theorist is Bandura, and Bandura really came up with the concept of the social learning theory, which is considered an extension of behaviorism. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I said that the grand theories laid out the framework, but there are a lot of theories that came afterwards that kind of extended the framework and developed a newer version of each of those theories. The learning theory is behaviorism. Social learning theory is that extension that Bandura alluded to, due to his research on what is called the Bobo doll. The Bobo doll is that inflatable doll that you can punch, and it kind of remains standing no matter how much you punch it down. Those inflatables were used in his research, where a child would watch an adult, a model, interacting with the doll in two different ways. They would either a group of children would watch the adult interact in a negative way, so they would hit the doll, insult the doll, and so forth. And then another group would watch the adult model appropriate behavior. They would play nicely with it or say kind comments. And then they were left alone with the doll and were watched behind, of course, glass to see what would they do. And believe it or not, the children pretty much modeled the behavior that they were seeing. As a matter of fact, they were even more innovative. And if they're seeing aggression, they actually inflicted more pain on the doll and did more novel things than the adult had just modeled. This brought to our attention and to to the minds of researchers the power of modeling, the power of the social context, and what children learn through social media and being subjected to when they play games that are violent, and how that children are very impressionable, and adults really have a very strong role when it comes to interacting with young minds.